Hello everyone, myself Ganga Babu. I'm here to discuss about the helping phases of social casework. The casework process helps the individual to cope with their problems in social functioning. The caseworker make use of the available resources to solve the problems and help the client to solve their maladjustments. In 1975, Max Siporin identifies 6 phases of social casework such as engagement, exploration or study, planning, intervention or treatment, evaluation, and finally termination. Engagement is the initial phase of social casework process, which is also called this intake phase. During the engagement phase, the following process happens: referral, meeting, admission of the client, rapport building, initiation of the relationship building, earning the trust of the client and his or her guardian if applicable, enrolling the client to the casework services voluntarily, and a summative or a quick study of the client is being done. The caseworker learns about the client's environment and their problem. The caseworker should make the client fully participate in the problem solving process. The client decides whether to accept the service or not, and the caseworker should encourage the client to continue the service. The caseworker must show respect for the self-worth and dignity of the client, and the worker's problem solving capacity and self-affirmation is profoundly influenced by the expression of individuality and ambivalence. The caseworker listens to the description of the problem as per the ways in which presented by the client. The worker has to listen to what the client says and understand what he or she does not say. The caseworker tries to understand through verbal and non-verbal cues. In this phase, the caseworker could learn about the client and their attitude towards life. The caseworker makes the client feel valuable and respect the dignity. This could win the client's trust and confidence upon the caseworker. It is important to maintain a professional relationship with the client. The initial phase of understanding client involves 3 key activities, that is, asserting the facts about the client, understanding how the problem and what is happening to the client, and deciding upon the means of intervention that worker will provide. The tools that could be used by the caseworker includes professional interview with the client and associated person, recording and documentation, collateral contact such as secondary contact including school, hospital, employers, relatives, etc. The second phase of the casework process is exploration or assessment or study. Here, the caseworker tries to understand the client's problem. The caseworker let the client elaborate the problem so that the caseworker get the better picture of the issue. 3 key questions asked by the client are asked to the caseworker let the client elaborate the problem so that the caseworker get a better picture of the issue. 3 key questions that are asked by the client includes: what is the problem? How did the problem occur? How to solve it? Assessment is a circular process as it keeps going on with the reviewing and evaluation. Here, the client's ability to solve the problems are also being assessed by analyzing their strength, capacities, limitation, motivation, and opportunities. As the worker encourages the client to explore the problem, the meaning of the facts become more clearer. The main task of the caseworker includes: assess the nature of the problem, its cause, and description of the problem in an understanding manner. Assess the client's nature and thus analyze their strength and weakness. This would help the client to understand their capacities and provide motivation and link the client to the resources. Assess the nature of the problem by establishing a casual relationship with the client. Assess the nature of the assistance or help provided by the agency. Assessment leads to diagnosis. Instead of diagnosis, we can also use the term problem identification. Diagnosis is a terminology that emerges from the medical model of social work. There are 3 different types of diagnosis or problem identification process. First is dynamic diagnosis. Dynamic diagnosis seeks a proper evaluation of the client's current problem as he is experiencing it now. It seeks to identify the various factors in active play in the current person situation configuration. It is a cross-sectional view of the forces currently operating in the client's problem. It seeks to establish what is the problem, factors contributes to it, effects of individuals' well-being, solution for it, and what are the means exist to overcome such problems. The next type of diagnosis is clinical diagnosis, the process of identifying a disease, condition, or injury based on the signs and symptoms a patient is having and the patient's health history and physical exam. Here, the clients are classified based on the nature of sickness and thus knows more about his personality, maladaptation, and understands the form of behavior which characterizes his malfunctioning. Finally, the etiological diagnosis, the process of identifying or determining the nature and cause of a disease or injury through evaluation of patient's history, examination, or review of laboratory data. The usefulness of understanding such a chain of causation may be several folds. Diagnosis is done based on the life history of a person and their problems that contribute to their maladjustment. We have to remember that client is a part of larger society. Society and its norms influences the client as well as the social worker. Casework cannot be practiced in isolation with other methods of social work. The system's approach should be used to analyze the problem of the client. That is, we should look at the social structure that influences the individual, like social institutions, social process, social stratification, etc. Here we have to apply our knowledge in sociology and economics to the assessment. Social structure systems influences the presenting problem. Acknowledging the structural system in which the client situation is embedded helps to understand the problem more holistically. Social workers advocate and create changes to deal with the oppression and discrimination while recognizing one's cultural structures and values. Social workers are expected to know the barriers to promote justice for their clients. Positionality is the social and political context. It creates your identity and how your identity influences and biases your perception of and outlook on the world. It is essential to explore the positionality of social worker as well as the client. The third stage of the casework process is planning. Here, the worker and the client comes into the consensus and decide on the plan of action. In this phase, the caseworker arranges the resources. While arranging the resources from outside the agency, the worker should be more conscious about the fact that it will be completely useful to the client. Many a times it would be hard to identify resources and then have to go to some other agency and mutual aid organization such as Alcoholic Anonymous, Parents Without Partners, fraternal organization and political clubs. Irrespective of the outcome, sharing of mutual tasks between the client and the worker increases their contribution's sense of worth and value. In order to ensure accountability and to have a clear picture of the goals, the worker and the client could enter into a contract. The contract is framed after deliberations between the worker and the client. The contract gives space to consider what has been done so far and what hasn't been done so far. This serves as a base to choose modes of interaction. Contracts are not common in Indian practice. However, it can be very helpful as a tool for facilitating the goals for the client as well as the social worker. The fourth phase of the social casework is intervention or treatment. Here, the caseworker focuses on implementing the plan that has been agreed upon by the client. That is, interventions begin with the setting of goals as decided by the client and the caseworker. The ultimate goal is to reduce the distress and improve the functioning of the client and the caseworker. When intervention is planned, it is important to check into the client's motivation, strength, and how the situation can be modified or changed. There are three possible interventions, such as using tools and techniques. Intervention at agency level by using resources available there. Intervention at community level by making use of the involvement of community resources. The client's participation in the intervention plan is to be ensured by the caseworker. The caseworker must ensure the use of principle of client self-determination and the principle of acceptance in casework process proposed by BISTEC. Limitations are handled and recognized realistically. There are direct and indirect intervention methods. The direct intervention takes place between the worker and the client. The client is helped to take constructive decisions and to maintain emotional balance. which should be favorable for their growth and change. Interventions include counseling, therapeutic interviewing, clarification, interpretation, and psychological treatment or other supportive techniques. In indirect method, the client chooses to solve the problem either by modifying the environment or by using the administration of practical services. Environment modification, that is, simply the modification of environment, could help improve the situation. The physical environment change or alteration of social systems are focused here. For example, the client may be encouraged to join recreational group or other group so that he or she relaxes and thereby functions better. In administration of practical services, client is provided help by the worker in identifying and helping them to get resources they need. The client is served in one's own agency or sent to another agency where he or she is best served, providing material help, legal and medical care, and arranging for the camp or for examples of practical services. The worker needs to have a thorough knowledge of community resources to use them selectively and economically. The fifth phase is evaluation phase. Here, the focus is on analyzing and understanding the results or outcome of the planned interventions. This phase will help the professional growth of the caseworker along with the client. This phase eliminates the chances of overlapping of services. The client would get a feedback regarding the process which would help in improving the future casework processes. The casework recording is an important tool used in this phase and helps in ensuring the transparency and accountability of the process. Recording along with documentation are continuous ongoing process throughout all the phases of casework intervention. Here, gathered data and facts are organized and recording for measuring the results. The final phase of the casework process is termination, which marks the end of the process which began on the consensus of the client and the caseworker. The process of study, assessment, and intervention do not continue forever. Once the result is achieved, the worker and the client together plans the termination. On reaching this stage, the client is expected to look back with satisfaction and accomplishment. The worker could plan out realistic goals for their client, which would give the client an idea regarding further plans that could be employed to reduce the problem effectively if needed. Here the caseworker's main role is to confirm that the client is capable of handling their issue by themselves and thus they have learned to cope with such situation in future. There is another phase after termination called follow-up. Some people say that follow-up should happen before termination. The logic of placing follow-up after termination is to signify that the relation between client and the caseworker and the agency may have officially terminated at a particular point because of the agency's policy as well as the caseloads of the social worker. Before termination, the caseworker make effort to ensure that the interventions are producing effects. The interventions are evaluated and the relationship is terminated. However, it is essential that regular follow-ups be conducted to ensure that the long-term benefit of the treatment or interventions are still being enjoyed by the client. The agency have their specific follow-up policy depending on the capacity of the agency. With this, we have covered 6 phases of social casework process. Thank you all for listening. Happy learning.